When we spoke to prepare this conversation, you told me that it all started when you were about 7 years old and you wanted a synthesizer.
That's right, yeah. So I could have been a sort of musician, but here I am, yeah.
Because your parents gave you a computer.
Correct, yeah.
And why did you start with that computer?
I mean, as you always do, this was a VIC-20, so a very, very primitive computer, I guess. So like early 80s, something like that, mid 80s. Yeah, what you did, of course, you played the games, but then I did not have one of those cassette players, so I only had, I think, 5 games, and I could either use those, or you could buy books, like programming books, and you sort of just entered like the programming code for the game to play it. And that could take you, when you were a kid, like a good 4 or 5 hours. So I learned programming from that.
And those were the cassettes that did like those weird...
This was even before that. So then you bought a book and you were typing in the game, and then the game was that you were like an asterisk that you moved around, and then it was like some squares, and not very interactive. But just from typing in the games, I learned programming. And then I did that for like as a hobby, and my brother as well, for a couple of years. And then my mom was a map technician, so she was drawing maps like by hand. And then she got a computer at work, like some kind of CAD software. And then I realized, holy shit! I mean, this computer has like graphics, and it had a mouse. And then I realized that what you can do with technology, at least from my perspective, to me was even cooler than the actual technology. So that's when I started getting interested in design, or the human aspect of technology in a way. And then I got Commodore 64 and Amiga, and my mother got Macintosh computers and stuff like that. And then it evolved into design, animations, video, stuff like that.
And did you feel when you look back then at that period, like did you have the impression that you're just sort of stumbling from one thing into the next, and that everything's possible, and it's just all a big playground, and you just keep adding these tools and make more and more amazing things, and possibilities are endless?
I think during that part in time, I was kind of prank driven in a way. So one thing that we did was that we went to the video store, and this was when we had Amiga computers, and with 2 VHS cassette players, we could go to the video store, rent a video, and then we could edit the subtitles. So we like created more funny subtitles, and then we recorded back to the original tape and returned the tape. So we did that, and we went to like the Tesco store or whatever, where they had these screens promoting cleaning utensils, and we did the same thing. We just re-edited them and did a bunch of weird things. And I think the crown jewel, this was later, was when we rented Memento. Do you remember that movie? Which was all fragmented and super weird, where we took that, and this took like weeks. We took that and we edited the movie into its linear form. So the whole point of the movie was taken away, and recorded back to the original tape and returned it. So very prank driven then. But from that, I realized that you could do cool stuff, and I started. My mom then was working for the county administration, and they did a lot of trade show stuff. So I started doing like multimedia things for trade shows with touch screens and things like that. So that was like the inception.
And then from there, you went on into classifieds.
Yeah. So this is also like just stumbled into something. So I'm from the south of Sweden, a very small town. And outside this town is an even smaller village. And I was working after school in a computer store, selling computer systems. And then someone put a note saying, I'm looking for someone who knows computer graphics. And not many people knew computer graphics in like 90, whenever this was, 94, 5, I think. So I called the number, and then it was a very weird setup. It was like almost like a WeWorky setup. A guy who was just like hanging out with his friends and doing stuff with computers, and then that then led to the inception of a classifieds startup back then that now is, I think it's the biggest classified startup or company in Europe. It's 36 markets. They own Spock here in Germany, for instance. It's called Blocket. So it's part of that, the early days there. But I wasn't there for very long. I was bought out and I was paid I got a really cool Macintosh Quadra computer with a 21-inch screen, so I can run Photoshop. I was very, very happy. And then the company was sold for a lot, like 4 years after or something like that.
And do you feel, in terms of the approach to design you had at that very basic stage of the internet, and how you think about design today, fundamentally, was it the same approach with just a lot more bells and whistles?
I'm thinking, was there even an approach in the beginning? I think it was just the novelty of being able to do stuff. So there was like when graphics came about and you had like drawing programs on the Amiga, new version of the tool, now I can do animations. Then you did animations. Then all of a sudden, there's this thing called the internet. And I remember first time I saw the internet and everyone were talking about it and it was so cool. And I was so underwhelmed because I thought it looked so crappy, just like gray background and just blue.
When was that? Do you remember?
It must have been in 94, 95 or something like that. Like super boring. But then I guess it's like, what has driven me, and I think what drives a lot of people in this room, is that all of a sudden you can do stuff that you couldn't do yesterday. So I think the early days of each new technology paradigm, I think are the most beautiful days, because it's very easy to become an expert because no one knows what to do of it. And it's so much fun because the thing, doesn't matter if it's like the internet or if it's mobile phones or now AR and stuff like that, no one knows what to make of it, and it hasn't found its identity just yet. So that's what I love, and trying to figure out what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. And from a human perspective, how does this help us as human beings on a small scale for me as a person, and on a wider societal scale? I think that's what I think is interesting. But I sense I still have, and I think my job is, I guess we'll get to that soon, it's a luxury because I get to hang out with all these super smart people who are playing around with the latest stuff, like doing things that they couldn't do yesterday, they are doing today.
Yeah, and I mean, and we don't need to go now chronologically about every step of the journey, because I'd rather spend more time talking about the product side and how you think about it. But basically, I mean, you went on and developed a number of agencies and startups.
Exactly. So just around the 2000 stuff like that, when I moved to Stockholm, this was on the top of the IT hype. And in a way, digital agencies were kind of like startups in a way. There were no startups, so that was the thing. And so I worked for an agency for a year, and then I thought I knew everything, and then I started my own agency, and I did that, and then that became several hundred people, and then I sold it, and I started a new agency. And then somewhere there, around 2005, we started thinking, when the whole Web 2.0 thing came about, it's like, okay, but there are now companies that basically have the same staffing as our agency, but they don't have any clients. They're working for themselves. So we sold the part of the agency to a Japanese network, and then we set up something that with today's terms would be called like a startup studio or something like that. So we did spend half of my time doing startup projects and half of my time doing client work. And then I sold that agency as well in 2011 or 12 or something, and then I've been with EQT now for 3 years.
When we spoke and we're speaking about design, one thing I noted you kept saying was about design and good design being delightful to the consumers, to people, and that's something I found you cared really a lot, and so that was sort of what you were really passionate about. So what is it that makes design delightful for people in your eyes?
To me, it's like I think it's two different things, and the fundamental thing is that you understand and you feel confident that you can use whatever tool it is, and that's the groundwork. But then you can always go the extra mile and also connect on an emotional level. So to me, you can sense that. Is this someone who deeply cared about the person who will use this, or is this just good enough? So in a way, I remember when the whole MVP thing came about, and that was, and I think Reid Hoffman went out and said that you should be, if you're not ashamed of your first launch, you will never succeed, or something like that. I never really bought into that aspect of it. I think it's, you sense it. You sense it. And I also think, since we're dealing with new technology, it's something that didn't exist before. You have to find like the right mental hooks or the right references in your head to hang the new thing up on, in a way, if that makes sense.
And when you look at a new interface, at a new product, and I guess these are very intuitive, but if you try to break them down, what are the ways you go about sort of assessing, do you like it or not? Do you think it's good or not? Do you think it has prospect or not?
Yeah. And I think that there's this data-driven movement now, which I'm all for, obviously. But I think it's pretty easy just to pretend you're the user. So if you have, every user is a human being. It doesn't matter how old or what background or what gender or what profession. You're a human being. And if you look at something and you pretend that you're the user, I think you figure it out pretty easily. And then I think most of the stuff you see today is so complicated. So a thing I did early on when I ran one of my first digital agencies was that I did lecture work and worked as like a computer teacher, teaching old people and all kinds of people how to use like Word and Excel and stuff like that. And I still do that because I think otherwise it's so easy to lose touch with reality, because a lot of things you see out there are so over-engineered and so complicated. And it's so easy to just bring someone in who does not know and just put that person in front of the service and see how they react. But yeah, keep it simple, I guess, and keep it friendly and.
In your experience, is it a little bit like writing text that you need twice as much time to make something, decomplicate something, declutter something, make it simple, than you need to add complexity?
I guess, yeah. I mean, just adding another tab is pretty easy, and another tab and another tab and another tab. But to really re-engineer something and try to think about what is the job I'm trying to achieve, what am I trying to solve, and how do I empower that person sitting in front of that screen. And I think that's also often a frustrating process, because you start somewhere and then you build and add stuff, and then all of a sudden you realize that this is too much, and then you have to rebuild everything from the beginning and create a new experience, and then you add more stuff, and then you have to rebuild to make it graspable or easy to use, or something like that.
How have you felt historically about the fact, and that's something I always struggle with, that if you look at conversions on a website, even like usually ugly websites but done in a particular way will convert way better than aesthetically pleasing websites, but which don't have sort of some shocking color combination which draws your attention. And that fact of life just kills me every time, because I don't know, I'm drawn towards the aesthetics. So I just wonder, you sort of embody both sides, right? Because you're looking at product, but you also, and conversions, obviously, yet you also have a deep rooting in design and in aesthetics. So, I mean, does it make you angsty as well, or?
Sometimes, but I think it's different things. I'm not sure it's the nice design or the ugly design that does it. I think it's more the focus of the team. If your sole focus of the team is aesthetics, then most likely you're not going deep and solving the real problem. But if your sole focus is to create something that works, and you evolve with users. You start somewhere in the garage, and then you build and build and build. Then that's the focus of your team. But sure, yeah. Sometimes you get a bit frustrated when you look at Craigslist or Amazon or something, and hey, it's so small things could make this a bit more pleasing to die. But again, I don't think that the job of the designer is to make things look nice necessarily. It's more, I mean, if you go into a supermarket, you don't want things to look like a Nike store or an Apple store. There's a point to the scrappiness and the splashes and the deals. It's like trying to get you in a specific mood and take specific action, I guess.
I want to switch a bit subject and talk about developing an organization, because you've built obviously these humongous agencies, right? I mean, 700 people for an ad agency. It's really big. How do you feel does that differentiate itself from building a large tech organization? Like, do you feel, you said it earlier, it's essentially we're doing the same thing, yet I'm not sure if process-wise both are really to be equated, if it's exactly the same.
Yeah.
I wouldn't think so, from few reasons, but I wonder what your opinion is on that.
Yeah, I think there are similarities and differences. And I think the main thing, of course, is if you're in an agency, you work for a client, and that client pays you, if not for your time, so you at least log time, report time. So time is a big deal in an agency. And that means that when you get a new project, that's the first thing you do. You assess, okay, how many hours would I need to solve this specific thing? And that then leads to this very waterfall-y process where you start with the strategy, and then you do some conceptual work, and then you create the design, and then you implement the design. And I'm not sure that's the best way to innovate. I mean, it works. If you've done it a few times, you create a website or a service, it works. While in a startup, it's way more iterative, because you don't think about your salary and the hours and the time. You might have like a cadence in sprints or something like that. I'm not sure I've thought this through, but I would argue that bringing developers from an agency environment into a startup environment doesn't make awful lot of sense, but bringing designers from an agency environment into startups can make a lot of sense, because you, as a designer in an agency, you learn to be a bit more precise and disciplined, because you have to be, because you have deadlines all the time, and you have clients you have to explain stuff for, and things like that. I'm not sure that's true, but a reflection.
I want to spend a bit of time before we open it up talking about EQT, because you guys are a bit the new kid on the block in the very large European VC stage and space. So tell us a bit about the fund. I mean, you're Sweden based.
Yeah, sure. So EQT is our parent company. They've been around since '94. They're one of the largest private equity companies in Europe. So we operate underneath that umbrella. So we're called EQT Ventures. We are a team now of 22 people. I'm in Stockholm. We're also in London, Amsterdam, San Francisco, and we have people on the ground here as well, but only like one person so far. The reason that EQT Ventures exists is that part of the archetypical startup journey, so many companies, great European companies, end up in the US, I would say. And it's of course, because of it's part of the archetypical journey, you're supposed to go to Silicon Valley, but it's also because, especially in the later stages, there hasn't been enough capital in Europe. You have to go to the US. So that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to set up like a US grade VC in Europe. So from a fund size perspective, we have one of the larger sizes in funds in Europe. It's 566 million. And that means that we can come in fairly early and then support the companies through a multi-stage approach all the way to like 75 million euro tickets, so pretty big tickets. So technically our sweet spot would be B round, maybe even C round, but we start around A and then follow on. And then the approach was, so EQT is I was like a financial powerhouse. A lot of people with finance background work there. But in the venture team, we're mainly people like myself. So ex-operators, ex-entrepreneurs who have done it themselves. So the three general partners are Case Colin, who was one of the first guys in Booking.com and did that whole journey. And I was perfected the city-by-city scaling formula. And then he went on to help Uber with the same thing. And then we have Hjalmar Windblad. He hates it when I say this, but he's kind of like the granddad of Stockholm startup ecosystem. He's done like 7 startups, IPO'd, sold to Microsoft, stuff like that. And then we have a guy called Lars Jernov who led the development of Candy Crush at King. So very like mobile-centric, growth-oriented. And then we have Andreas, who was part of founding the global esports movement. Henrik set up Spotify's analytics team. Alistair co-founded Huddle, this group collaboration software, which was just before Slack. It's also GP. So it's a very like operational, hands-on-y vibe. But it also means that none of us were VCs before this, which is sometimes it's almost as if you wake up and wonder if this is like a new really bad reality show, like people who don't know anything about investing starts VC together. But it works and it's fun.
And one of the things you told me was also that a further aspect was that you invested quite a lot in internal tools to basically give you an analytical edge about what was going on in the market, what was the interesting pockets of development and of innovation. So can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there are always two sides to every coin. I think there are good things and there are bad things to being new to something. But one of the good things is that you don't know how it's being done, so you do it in your own way. So I think we have had a very engineeringly driven approach to setting up processes and workflows and stuff like that. So our tech stack, I think is pretty extraordinary. And we also pretty early on started developing our own tools. We have one tool called Motherbrain and another one called Together, which is in a way our own internal startups that we use for deal sourcing. So we use machine learning and stuff like that to find alerts in open and closed data to say, okay, this company you should look a bit closer at. So every morning the analysts in our team get 20 or so companies to go through, and you can also use the tool more proactively and see, I'm going to Germany, give me a list of the 20 most interesting companies that trended in a certain way the last month or something like that. So now we have a team of, I think, 5 people developing this Motherbrain tool in our team. And it's not just for EQT Ventures anymore, but for the whole of EQT.
And you've also been very active since the onset to connect with local angel communities, and you also have an app, a matchmaking app. Right?
Exactly, called Together, which is kind of like a Tinder, like a matchmaking app between angel investors and early stage founders. And the whole idea is to provide some kind of value to angels, and also for these early stage companies to get on our radar. So if you run like a seed stage company or even a pre-seed stage company, feel free to check out Together on the EQT Ventures website and submit your company there and tell us what kind of angel you're looking for and so forth, and then we might be able to facilitate an introduction. And then another cool thing with these tools is that obviously in 10 years time, when you become a VC, you don't evolve anymore in the detail skills. But since we developed both Motherbrain and Together in-house, I still do wireframes. I still get the chance to try out Framer and Figma and all the new sketch plugins and stuff like that. So I still do my old job, at least maybe one day a week. And the same thing goes for the analytics people and the tech people and so forth.
What was the most unexpected thing for you of transitioning into an investment role versus your jobs before?
I think back to like group dynamics, we were in the agency, people, it's more clear roles, like you do strategy, you do design, you do creative and so forth. When setting up EQT Ventures, we were a bunch of people where all of us had run companies on our own before. And in the beginning, we joked, it was almost as if we just try to delegate to one another in a big circle back and forth. And then after like a couple of months, we had to sit down and say, okay, we've all done a lot of stuff in the past, but now we're doing this. And I think one thing we wouldn't say struggled with, but an insight in the beginning is that when you're an entrepreneur, your horizon might be like, I don't know, 3 months or something. Some other company can kill your startup in 3 months. So you have to be super paranoid. It's you against the world. You have to kill every other startup. If you're a VC, your horizon is 10 years and you have to be friends with everyone. And another big difference is when you're an entrepreneur, it's about you and you're on stage and you're the one talking. But when you're a VC, it's about the entrepreneur. So you're a listener and a coach. You're not a doer. And I think for all of us, that has been a new thing, which, yeah, you do some mistakes and you have to remind yourself that these are the dynamics of VC, which is very relationship oriented, obviously.
Just one thing that sprang to mind is and that's for the audience, your colleague, and I'm going to butcher his name, Hilmar. Hjalmar. He was guest at Startup Grind Stockholm, and there's an amazing piece in that conversation where he talks about running a company which was then cloned by the Sumverse, and in great detail, and which they managed to kill the Sumver company in the end, I think, but it was quite a ride within a few days, basically, of this company springing up.
Yeah, no, that's. If you mention that to him, he gives you a lecture about it. It's still scars from that, I think. But I think that's the point. I mean, when you've been through these kinds of things, I mean, the only way you can know about these things is to go through them and then be able to share that knowledge or that insight with the new generation of founders and entrepreneurs. That's pretty fun.
Cool. So I think we're going to open up for questions.